Georgia's Public Service Commission can determine your energy costs, broadband access, and your family's well being. In this interview, former State Representative Keisha Waites tells us why she is the right person to make those high stakes decisions that impact everyday Georgians, from rising utility bills to the push for clean energy and internet access for all. With four candidates vying for the Democrat nomination in the June 17 primary election, this race isn't just about politics. It's about the future of Georgia's economy. Join the conversation as we break down the PSC's role, unpack what's at stake, and hear directly from the woman ready to challenge the status quo. The decisions are big, but the mission is clear, putting Georgia's people first. Now on to Keisha Waites. And Keisha Waites, it's great having you with us today. And you're running for the Public Service Commission, District 3. We're excited to have you on Editorial Interchange.
I am fired up and ready to go.
One of the things that you have is you've had a history in politics as a state representative. You want to give us a little bit of a summary related to your political history?
Sure. I had the amazing privilege of serving in the Georgia House of Representatives for 3 terms. I served on 3 very powerful committees, including public safety, transportation, as well as juvenile justice, where we work with young people. After that, I had the privilege of being elected to the Atlanta City Council, where I served on finance, public safety, and transportation, and got to take on some challenging issues here at the local level. Prior to that, I served 15 years with the federal government. 5 I spent with the Small Business Administration. And thereafter, I went over to the Department of Homeland Security, working for FEMA, where we assisted businesses and families that had had challenges following natural disasters throughout the United States.
Awesome. Well, we've got a crowded field in the Democratic primary for the PSC. What made you go for the PSC position?
Right. Well, like you, I've gotten one of these massive utility bills. And, it's no secret that we've had some challenges. Let me start by saying the first thing. I am not anti-business. I am not anti-tech. But I do not believe that deregulation served the people of Georgia in any way. When I look at the tax incentives that have been given out globally to the tune of $296 million, that happened off the backs of taxpayers. Right now in Georgia, data centers pay 40% less than the national average of anyone out there. And so in terms of data centers. And so it's my hope is to bring some equity to the conversation. Many people have no idea that the Public Service Commission exists to be a watchdog for you, the consumer. And I'm hoping to bring back some of that equity and the advocacy role for consumers.
So you brought up the data centers, and of course, that's a big issue now. Artificial intelligence can't do without a data center. Do you have what you could describe as maybe an overarching philosophy on the current environment on how you would try to create a functional and cost-effective energy supply system?
Great question. So data centers are here to stay. Not arguing that point. I'm not anti-business. I'm not anti-tech. What we're saying is that this emergence or this influx of centers that have come to the United States, one, because they've been incentivized by our state government, which is fine. However, it's been done off the backs of working families and seniors. So I feel the need to balance that. A data center uses the equivalency of a small town. Whatever a small town utilizes daily in water consumption and power, that's what a data center utilizes in one day. So I want to help kind of contextualize so you'll understand what we're talking about. However, the rate that they pay is far less than what you and I pay as a consumer. So we simply want to bring some equity to that conversation. Yes, incentives are necessary for good business, but we don't do that off the backs of working families. And so what I would like to see is a tiered rate where data centers and utility companies pay their fair share for usage. And I'd like to recompute or recalculate that formula to ensure that the consumers are not paying the price as it relates to incentivizing data centers and making sure that they are paying what the national average is.
Right. And do you find that the data centers are paying sufficient amounts in terms of being taxed for their property taxes and so forth, that it is a proposal that's worth pursuing, these data centers?
Well, I mean, obviously, Georgia, we want Georgia to be a robust economy and a great place to do business, right? So our governor talks about that all the time. I think corporation taxes are about 6%. I don't have any problem with that. What I am simply stating is this, is that there are other things that we can do to support families. And I believe we do that through energy assistance. So if we're going to give out incentives, let's make sure we are taking care of those who are most vulnerable. And I'm talking about working families and seniors. So I'd like to see a tiered system for those who are having economic challenges. And I think we can do that by expanding energy assistance to seniors over the age of 65 through the low income energy assistance program, which, the federal government now has pretty much decided they're going to do away with. I'd like to see that through renewable energy sources such as solar. Georgia Power has a buyback program right now to incentivize solar, but no one knows about it. So we do PSAs. We advertise it through social media to get that information out there. And lastly, the people who need the PSE the most know the least about it. That is not by accident. It's not accidental that people don't know the Public Service Commission even exists. So in many ways, they've operated in more of a clandestine, secret kind of society. And so it is our hope to bring this information to the forefront, get consumers engaged, get them active, and help them to understand that this organization is set up to work for you.
You kind of touched on my next question a little bit, but let me go ahead and ask it just in case you want to add to it. How would you rate the performance of the current PSC members?
So, I think it's important to be fair. This is a body or a group of individuals that I'm going to have to work with come November in terms of the election cycle. I don't believe the Public Service Commission has done the best job in terms of advocating for consumers. I don't believe that there's been transparency. I think the best tool or a level of efficiency for transparency is sunlight. I think that people have to know what's going on. We have had multiple, I think 6 rate increases in the last 2 years. That's problematic. Yet the public has done very little to weigh in because many times they have no idea that this exists. The political football in terms of postponing and delaying the elections. In many ways, I think that was unethical. So, in terms of a rating for the PSC, I think that there's some work that needs to be done. But I also think we need to change the composition and makeup of the PSC. Regardless of whether you are a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, whether you live in rural Georgia or metro Atlanta, everybody wants the same thing, and that is safe, clean energy. There hundreds of coal ash ponds throughout the state of Georgia, creating toxins and polluting the environment. I think we need to get those cleaned up. Oftentimes, those are going to be in low income communities where the PSC is needed the most. So, right now, I think we've got a lot of work to do. I think we're moving in the right direction. Governor Kemp recently talked about the fact that we're freezing the rates for the next couple of years for Georgia Power. I think that these conversations that we're having right now have moved that along. And I think as more people come on board and become more familiar with the work that the PSC does, certainly we can go in the right direction.
To your point, I think a lot of people do not realize that we have the PSC, and the PSC does make a determination on the profit margin of the big utilities like a Georgia Power, and that Georgia Power currently is somewhat above the national average in terms of the profit margin. So a lot of people just don't see that.
We don't have a problem with Georgia Power making money. We don't want
Right.
them to do it on the backs of the consumer.
And let me ask you this. Do you think that Georgia utilities are harmful to the climate?
Certainly, coal ash is not something that's going to be positive in nature. I would certainly think that. But we are moving away. Right now, 60% of Georgia is powered by a nuclear plant. Most people don't even know that, right? So we can talk about wind, we can talk about solar, and the reality is these are very expensive investments. If you can recall, I remember being a kid when a DVD or a VHS players who are very, very expensive. I can remember putting cameras all around my house several years ago, and the cost was insane. And now, it's pretty much minimum. It's affordable now. And I say that to say that technology certainly has moved us in the right direction. It's my belief that right now we need to get ahead of the national average in terms of what other states and countries are doing in terms of clean energy. And I think that direction at the end of the day is going to be solar. Can everybody put a rooftop on their house right now? Of course not. But as we move to make it more affordable, and the reality is Georgia Power has no incentive to push that because it will in fact mess with their profits and stakeholder profits.
And I think Georgia now is number 7 in the nation in terms of solar capacity. So do you think we're heading in the right direction?
Well, I think these conversations certainly have brought that about. I think technology, access to information, certainly would bring that about. But there's so much more that we can do. And I think we do that by one, educating the consumers that those options are even available to them. We have some of the highest issues as it relates to lung and breathing illnesses, asthma, bronchitis, things of that nature right here in metropolitan Atlanta because our air is not clean. And so as we start moving to clean those areas up, you will start to see a benefit to overall health for Georgians. Lastly, you may recall BioLab caught fire several months ago in Rockdale County in Conyers. Certainly, the PSC can do a lot in terms of educating families in terms of energy and water consumption. Just putting that fire out alone took millions of gallons of water. Going back to data centers, when they come to town, they strain water and power, they strain and take away resources from the grid. So we have to reinvest resources back into those communities that have been impacted. And I think we can do that through community benefit agreements.
Well, let's talk about, we know for a fact that one of the most reliable and powerful sources of electricity is the nuclear option.
It is.
We did expand Plant Vogel. It was very painful. It was very long. It was very expensive. Do you think that because of the massive amount of regulation around nuclear energy that we've made nuclear too expensive to implement at this point?
Well, plants 3 and 4 had massive overruns to the tune of about $35 billion. So at the end of the day, when you look at the cost that went into that, because we, the consumer, financed that. And I think a lot of people don't realize that you finance that through your utility bills and through the infrastructural improvements. So I would say at the end of the day, that investment did not pay a return back to the consumer. In fact, it took us in the wrong direction, in my opinion. So what I'd like to see is us start to take a look at wholesale investments, and that is working with smaller companies. Fort Valley is very unique in that they own their own power companies, right? So I'd like to see that in the rural areas. I think that that's a step in the right direction in terms of wholesale solar because individual families on the street may not be able to afford access to that. But if we start working with our schools, working with our libraries, where there's a community benefit as a whole, we can offset some of those costs. Lastly, we talked about the fact that Georgia Power has brought in record number of profits. Well, when we're signing these articulated, stipulated agreements and these benefit agreements, that's where the nuts and bolts, we can have conversations about what investments and resources we're putting back into those communities. And this is something that I have a long history of doing as a member of the Georgia General Assembly and as a former member of the Atlanta City Council. I have those existing relationships and I've done this work in the past. And at the end of the day, Keisha, well, what makes you the best candidate? Well, I'll tell you. I don't know a lot about energy power, but I have a energy policy. But I have a long history of advocating and working for Georgia families throughout the years. I have a voting record that speaks to working for Georgia families. I am proud in the past to have received the Sierra Club endorsement for the work that I've done surrounding climate change, surrounding environmental usage. We had a landfill right over here in metropolitan Atlanta off of Moreland Avenue that took us years to shut down. Recently in South Fulton, we had another landfill that was on fire for months at a time. Slowly but surely, we were able to get those shut down. So I'm not a Johnny come lately to this conversation, and this is work that I've been doing for many, many years.
And just to clarify, do you see nuclear as a potential future option for meeting electrical demand with all these data centers and whatnot?
Absolutely. Given that they're here to stay, they're not going anywhere. Certainly, the energy consumption and demand is going to skyrocket and go through the roof. Uh, Folks are flocking to Georgia like no other, and in these Metro Atlanta areas, specifically Gwinnett, I believe is one of the fastest growing counties. So certainly that is an option. I'm not opposed to that. What I am saying is that we need to look at multiple options as it relates to energy and renewable energy sources for the state of Georgia, so that way we're not completely reliant upon nuclear and coal, but we're looking at other options for us in the state of Georgia.
I know with solar power as an alternative, there were a lot of promises made about the solar industry, what it could do for the energy grid. Has solar, do you think, lived up to the promises of the past that were made?
Well, there are twofold problems. I think that not enough people are aware of it. And again, the fact that Georgia Power has a buyback program is challenging. So I think we need to increase that rate to make it more affordable for working families, but also to match the retail electric prices to ensure fair compensation for solar customers. We can do that also by expanding the caps to allow more homeowners to benefit. And then finally, simplifying the interconnection process to reduce the bureaucracy, the hurdles as it relates to solar consumption. So that's been a lot of the challenges, is the fact that most people don't have access to it. And we also need to increase the buyback program so that more people can take advantage of it.
Is the elimination of fossil fuels for electricity production, is that a goal of yours?
Well, I think that is more of a long-term conversation. I've heard a lot of people talk about that, but at the end of the day, I think that there are other things that we can look at short term, and that includes strengthening the regulations surrounding coal-fired plants, increasing investments in renewals. Midterm, I think we can possibly phase out natural gas and biomass by expanding solar and offshore wind. And then longer term, we can achieve for decarbonization through nuclear, solar, and battery storage.
And then for the data centers, because they do eat up so much electricity, some of them are actually discussing creating what is termed as small modular nuclear plants just to run their facilities. Is that something you would favor? And if you do, or even if you don't, should the PSC be regulating these private utilities just for these singular plants?
Well, I think we have to be realistic. Technology is here to stay. We have to power these facilities. They use a tremendous amount of water. Some of these facilities are larger than football fields, so that we can understand what we're discussing right now. So, absolutely, I support that. What I do not support is the fact that we finance these infrastructural improvements again by the stakeholders and by the rate and taxpayers. So, when we are articulating community benefit agreements, when we're in the process of having these conversations, this needs to be built into the rate process so that this is not passed on to the consumer. So some of that $296 million that we're putting out there for incentives to bring companies and businesses to Georgia, I think we do that by reinvesting in the grid with some of those dollars. Last year, Plant Vogel raised residential rates by almost 24% just for 1,000 megawatts of energy. Yet, Georgia Power disconnections are also 8 times higher than the national average as it relates to utility disconnections. And so I'm saying that there is a direct correlation by raising the rates and the fact that individuals are not able to keep up. So there has to be a balance as it relates to the residential and business needs.
So if a data center like a Microsoft, an Apple, any of these big ones, Facebook, if they wanted to create a small modular nuclear facility that would only power their data centers, is that something you would be in favor of?
So I don't want to be disingenuous. We're using nuclear power now. So let's also deal with that, because I think a lot of individuals don't know that 60% of our energy comes from nuclear power plants in Georgia. So that they're already here. The question is how do we finance them as it relates to a particular data center? I don't have a problem with that, because when you look at where these facilities are going, Jackson County, Douglas County, out in some of these rural communities, we're going to need those infrastructural improvement. Unfortunately, data centers really don't bring a lot of jobs, which most people don't
Right.
know, and they eat up all of the energy and water consumption. So it will be essential and necessary to create something like this. What I am simply stating is, if we're going to build these mini nuclear facilities to power these data centers, let's make sure that it's baked into the cake that the financing, the infrastructural improvements of these facilities don't come off the backs of the communities that will be negatively impacted by their presence.
Right. And if they were to finance it on their own, because we're talking about trillion-dollar companies here with
Yes.
Apple and some of these others,
Yes.
would that they could literally bypass the utilities and maybe the PSC. Does that become an issue
Well,
if they do it on their own?
that's where the General Assembly comes into the conversation in terms of regulating. And there's been a lot of conversations about bringing certain regulations back up under the PSC. And for that reason, I would certainly support that. I mean, the PSC is one of the most powerful agencies in the state of Georgia, yet no one even knows that it exists. So certainly bringing any more oversight and purview under the PSC, I think is going to be a good thing for the consumer, because it was, initiated and came about as a advocacy organization for ratepayers and consumers.
Um, is it possible to bring utility costs down? And if so, what would your proposals be?
Mhm. Well, I think a couple of things that we can do. We can mandate that data centers, that the maximum usage that they operate at the opposite of when we have peak hours from residential consumers. So, for example, a couple of years ago, when we were having challenges with water consumption and low water rates due to a lack of rain, we asked individuals and consumers to water their lawns in the evenings and at night, right, or on the weekends. And so, I think that this will be the perfect ask of these data centers, is that the maximum usage, the peak hours of their consumption, that they happen at the opposite times when the business community is moving around and when people and humans are moving around. So I'd like to see this done at offset hours so that we can offset the demand for the power and water usage that we are having.
There's some concern out there in the agricultural world that we're now displacing a lot of agricultural land with solar farms. Um, is that going to be a problem in the future?
Well, that's an interesting conversation. Having served in the General Assembly, farmers have had many, many challenges over the years with the storms that have hit the state of Georgia, with the import, with tariffs. All of those things certainly play a role. Right now, we have a lot of land in the state of Georgia that is undeveloped. I think is a great way to put it. So I don't necessarily believe that data centers will be replacing or in competition with farms. I don't believe that, because now farming, we have hydroponics, we can farm in water, and so the technology is there to do something different. What I do think is that we have to balance the needs of technology and data centers versus the community. And that would include the farm community. The question, I think, is, given the amount of exorbitant water that these facilities will be utilizing, how do we balance that with the farming community? And what I'd like to see is we take some of that wastewater from these facilities and use it as a cooling mechanism, because a lot of the water is used to keep these facilities cool, just like a nuclear reactor plant. So we can utilize that. And so again, we go back to solar, renewable energy. So with that same wastewater, we can use that to cool these plants, cool down these particular facilities. And that's a cost saving to the consumer as well as to the data centers.
In Europe, just recently, we've seen a lot of grid related problems in Germany. We watched Spain and Portugal have a total blackout. They're relying a lot on these alternative energies. Are there any lessons from what we're seeing in Europe for us here in Georgia?
Well, and let's also not forget Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has had several massive outages as it relates to investment in the grid. So that when we have a conversation surrounding setting rates and how we determine rates and what taxpayers are going to pay, you know, the PSC can make the argument that we've got to invest back into our grid. So I think there's no pushback there. Certainly, we want to have access to service and we want it to be clean and reliable. However, given what you've seen in Europe, given what you've seen in as well as Puerto Rico, I think that when you look at what's happening in Georgia, certainly in Plant Vogel, the consumer has made those investments. When you look at the number of coal ash ponds we have all throughout the state of Georgia, we've seen those investments. What I don't think we've seen is a robust, real desire to move in another direction to start looking at other alternatives. And so I'll be looking to folks like Georgia Power and the Southern Company to expand our solar program to make it more affordable for consumers, as well as educating consumers as to the benefits of solar and wind options.
And, in terms of, we've seen a little bit in California too, they've had some issues with some utilities. Um, how do we get a grid system that is not only reliable but is protected and protected from natural events, sunspots coming down and affecting the grid, but also terrorist activity that could jeopardize the grid. What do we do to create a grid that we can count on under all circumstances?
I'm glad you mentioned the homeland security impact. I think for wastewater treatments, that's always been a major concern in terms of major cities. However, rural communities have different concerns. So how do we balance the needs of business as well as consumers? Well, I want to talk about the environmental impact. At the end of the day, expanding fossil fuel infrastructure will lock Georgia into decades of reliance on oil, coal, methane gas, further contributing to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, which is why you've seen all of these storms throughout the country. Well, what I would like to see is more investment in terms of renewable energy, things like solar and wind, but also a cost effective approach toward reducing the need for fossil fuels in the first place. Lastly, many people will argue that fossil fuels are necessary for maintaining a stable grid in energy. Well, during times of transition and renewables, we have to balance that urgency against the aggressing needs of wind and bad storms. And so when we are setting rates, we have to be thinking about, and you start to see us to put some of the utilities underground. You're starting to see that all over the state of Georgia and around the country. I think those are the types of investments that we'll be looking at. And there is a cost to that. And I don't think the consumer has a problem with absorbing that cost. But what we don't want to absorb the cost of is many nuclear plants that power data centers. And then we take on another 34% as we did with financing Plant Vogel.
And in relation to terroristic activity, hacking especially, because we've seen, I think there was a Chinese element that was hacking into one of the utilities in the Midwest. And I know we had at least one attempt here in Georgia years
Yes.
ago. Are you willing to pay whatever's necessary to create a system or embellish a system to create a system that's not hackable, or at least as much of a deterrent as we can possibly create?
I think that when you had utilities companies come and ask for these rate increases, I think some of that is baked into the cake, and so we're already paying those costs. And as I mentioned to you earlier, there was a 24% increase in our utility bills to finance Plant Vogel. Some of those other improvements were related to Hurricane Helen, Hurricane Matthew, some of the storms that you saw throughout the state of Georgia. So those costs have already been factored in. I'm having a conversation about shareholders, stakeholders, and profits. And so, the same way that we have to eat and share some of that reliability in terms of cost for grid investments, for infrastructure improvements, I would like to see some of our utility companies, including Georgia Power, pass some of those shareholder profits back into infrastructural, back into renewable energy and other opportunities that will benefit consumers.
Now, let me ask you this, because, of course, the utilities get more of a monopolistic type of opportunity. We give that to them. The PSC was created to kind of keep a lid on that and make sure that everything is above board and in the best interest of the citizens of Georgia. The PSC will literally has the ability to control the profit margins of these utilities. So How do you, as a PSC commissioner, determine what is a reasonable profit margin for a utility?
Great question. So the way that consumers set rates, and I find this process fascinating. I'm going to be posting this on my social media. So a utility company like Georgia Power would submit a request for a rate change or any supporting data and justifications for the rate change. The PSC would then in turn study that request, and they have the power to either suspend rate proposals up to 5 months or to allow them to go through this review process. I support additional public hearings, stakeholder improvements, where the utility company gets to make its case. And this includes consumer advocates, this includes businesses, and they can challenge that request. And so, certainly, I support public comment. Lastly, the Public Service Commission has the opportunity to examine the utility company's financials. They have the power to conduct an audit. They have the power to cross-examine witnesses to ensure that that rate hike is justified. And then the last process is the final decision. After reviewing all the evidence, after reviewing all the testimony, the PSC will then take a vote as to whether or not to approve it, the rate hike, to modify the rate hike, or they can completely flat out reject the rate hike. And so that is the process for how they ask for a rate increase or determine how we're spending taxpayer dollars as it relates to rate increases. I want to highlight deregulation did not serve Georgia or anywhere. Having a monopoly certainly has not benefited Georgia. But I think right now we've got to go back and revisit the power that Georgia Power currently has as it relates to the monopoly they have on the state and whether or not they have been a good steward in terms of taking those profits and reinvesting back into communities, or has that been on the shoulders and backs of consumers? And I think right now, each of us, when you look at your utility bills, when you look at the challenges that we're having, I think that there's some work to do. No, we have not experienced some of the things that Puerto Rico has experienced or some of our friends over in the European countries. But what I do think is that given the absorbent rates that we're paying, we have to do a better job of balancing those needs.
And as a candidate, would you be willing to accept any kind of campaign donations from employees of utilities or lobbyists that work for utilities?
Well, running statewide can be grossly expensive. It really can. And so I can tell you to date, I have not accepted any funding from Georgia Power. And in past, as a state representative, Georgia Power has been major contributors to campaigns. I do support certain legislation, and I'm disappointed that the governor vetoed Senate Bill 34. But there was a piece of legislation in the General Assembly that would have put a moratorium and kind of paused data centers to kind of allow us to evaluate and catch up. Lastly, we don't have any policy as it relates to rates for data centers. We're kind of flying by the wing. So I would like to see some work done around that conversation, which I think is important. But the last piece is members of the General Assembly are not allowed to take any dollars during the legislative session. And the reason why that is in place is to ensure integrity and to ensure that we're not making decisions and financially benefiting from those votes and those decisions. So I believe that the PSC should not be taking any funding from any organization, utility, or corporation that it will intend to regulate. And right now, the PSC regulates natural gas, infrastructural transportation, telecommunications, electricity, as well as water. So they have a huge umbrella of individuals that they regulate. It's my understanding there are two candidates that are incumbents that currently have over $500,000 in campaign donations. Can you imagine what we could do with those funds as it related to energy assistance, as it related to solar buyback, things of that nature, environmental studies surrounding how those families were impacted by the fires at BioLab? I mean, there's a lot of work, Steve, that we can do with those dollars. And so I don't think that, we should be rubber stamping a blank check for utility companies.
Well, we have covered a lot of issues related to PSC. You've given us a good look at what's going on, but we always ask at the end of the interview, is there anything that we did not ask that we should have asked you that you want to tell our viewers?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I want to give a shout out to Rosie's. There's one in my neighborhood as well as all over the city of Atlanta. They have great breakfast. It's pretty reasonably priced. Service is outstanding. And so shout out to Rosie's. Thank you for what you do. Had breakfast with you guys this morning as well as a meeting. Um, I am not an expert, Steve, on energy policy in any way. However, I have a long track record of advocating for Georgia families. I've done that through my 3 terms of service on the Georgia House of Representatives, actually representing the very communities that I'd like to represent here in the Public Service Commission on District 3, and that's DeKalb, Fulton, in Clayton County. However, regardless of whether you live up in the Blue Hill Mountains of Georgia or whether you're down on the coastal areas of Brunswick, it is my hope and prayer to be an advocate and to continue to be your voice. I look forward to traveling the state. Right now, those meetings are held at 244 Washington Street here in Atlanta. I think that's a problem. I think if you're going to represent the consumers throughout the state, you've got to get in the car, you've got to drive around the state and hear about what's going on in Sparta. You've got to know about what's going on down, in Baker County and all of these areas where these data centers are coming. I'd like to host town hall meetings on a statewide level. I fully support community engagement and public awareness campaigns where we can educate consumers. If there's going to be a rate hike or any proposal of a rate hike, I'm looking forward to coming to Savannah, Albany, Augusta, Valdosta, and having conversations in tandem with your council meetings, in tandem with your county commission meetings, to advocate, but also to bring you information so that you can make an informed decision. This election is historic in the sense that we have not had a PSC election in a very long time. Again, most people don't even know the PSC exists. I don't think that's by accident. I don't think they want you to know that it exists. So it's my hope that you will come out and be a part of the conversation. Early advance voting will start on Tuesday, May 27th throughout the state of Georgia. It will continue through June 13th, and this election will be held on June 17th. I have a website I'd love for you to visit. That is www.keishawaites.org. That's ORG. Well, we have information surrounding our platform, surrounding the work that I've done. There's a biography. And even if you want to just give a few bucks to help pay for yard signs and robocalls and commercials, certainly we would love to have your support. But Steve, I'd love to hear from the voters. Campaigning and getting out of the house and talking to people is one of the most fun things about this, but also telling people about the importance of the PSC and how the PSC should be working for you is what my ultimate goal is.
Well, Keisha, you never disappoint. You're always willing to do an interview. You're always willing to put your thoughts out there, and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Brown, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's my hope that after the June 17th election that we can come back and get together. Should there be a runoff, God forbid, I'd love to have the opportunity to come back and share some thoughts. And I'll look forward to traveling the state of Georgia. If you are somewhere in the rural areas or whether you're up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, please invite me. I have a vehicle. I can get there. I'm just a little person, but with enough notice, I'm happy to get there. I'm off on the weekends from my full-time job. I'm a little working person, but for the most part, I made time to pencil this in and to make sure that we are taking the conversation out into the community. And so thank you for this amazing platform and opportunity. I look forward to posting this interview on my social media and as well as the website so people can hear more about the amazing work that the PSC does.
Thank you, Keisha Waites. We look forward to seeing you again. Hey, we hope you enjoyed that interview with Keisha Waites. We love getting into the long-term interviews, looking at what's going on with the individual candidates, seeing what they know on policy, what they're trying to do for the individual citizens of Georgia. I think Keisha gave you some of that. Please like, share, and subscribe. That helps us. It also helps you. It gets us more interviews, gets us more views to allow us to do more of the good long-term interviews that you like. So if you want to do something where you have a position that you'd like to offer, we'll give you a 3-minute clip. We're the only podcast that does that. We do 3-minute short clips. Send us a pitch at editorialinterchange.net. We'd love to review it. If we go for it, we'll put you on our channel. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next interview.